The secret role of the IMF in coups across Latin America. The story of Latin America in the 20th century is one of interrupted dreams, nations that reached for prosperity, leaders who promised justice, and people who fought for freedom, only to find themselves trapped in an invisible web. A web woven not with weapons, but with debt, contracts, and economic advice. And the name of that web was the International Monetary Fund, the IMF. It began in 1944 at the Bretton Woods Conference. The IMF was presented as a savior of the global economy. Its mission, on paper, was noble: to stabilize currencies, prevent crises, and ensure worldwide prosperity. But behind that idealistic facade hid another purpose: to keep financial power concentrated in the hands of the world's major powers. During the 1950s and 1960s, Latin America began to dream big. Brazil, Argentina, Chile, and others sought industrialization, independence, and social reform. Their leaders wanted to control their own resources, protect national industries, and end economic dependence on foreign interests. But that vision scared someone, and it wasn't just their neighbors. In Washington, policymakers and bankers watched nervously. Latin America was rich: oil, copper, coffee, fertile lands, and, more importantly, it was strategically vital in the Cold War. Any government that defied the U.S.-led financial order was labeled a threat. That's when the IMF stepped onto the stage. The first coups didn't come from armies. They came from loans. The IMF offered development aid, modernization programs, and stabilization packages. But every dollar came with invisible strings. Open your markets, privatize your industries, cut social spending, and let the IMF oversee your budget. What looked like help soon became a trap. When a country couldn't pay, the IMF returned, not with assistance, but with demands. Budgets were rewritten abroad. Public policies were dictated by foreign advisors. And when presidents dared to resist, something unexpected happened: strikes, shortages, uprisings, and sometimes military coups. One of the first and most tragic examples was Chile, 1973. President Salvador Allende had been democratically elected, promising to nationalize the copper mines and give Chileans control of their wealth. Within months, U.S. companies cut credit lines. The IMF blocked loans. Inflation exploded. Stores ran out of basic goods. What looked like economic chaos was, in reality, a manufactured crisis. And then, September 11, 1973, tanks rolled into Santiago. Allende died defending his government. General Augusto Pinochet took power. Days later, the IMF reopened Chile's credit lines. The market, they said, had been restored. The same pattern appeared across the continent. Brazil, 1964. President João Goulart proposed social reforms: land redistribution, limits on profit remittances, and national control over oil. Within weeks, the U.S. cut aid. The IMF suspended negotiations. Newspapers began spreading fear of communism. Then came the coup, and as soon as the generals took over, new IMF loans flowed in. It became clear: economic manipulation was a new form of warfare. Each decade brought a new crisis: hyperinflation, debt defaults, currency collapses. But were they natural or engineered? In the 1980s, Latin America entered what economists now call the lost decade. Nations were drowning in debt. The IMF imposed structural adjustment programs: slash education, privatize state companies, eliminate subsidies. Hospitals closed, teachers went unpaid, millions were thrown into poverty, all in the name of stabilization. In Bolivia, tens of thousands of workers were laid off overnight. In Argentina, austerity destroyed the middle class. In Peru, President Alan Garcia tried to break free from IMF control, and the country was immediately cut off from global finance. Behind those technical reforms was a clear pattern: control through dependency. Each bailout chained nations further. Each recommendation weakened sovereignty. But the people started waking up. Scholars, journalists, and even ex-IMF officials began to leak documents showing coordination between the IMF, the U.S. State Department, and even the CIA. Economic tools were being used to achieve what wars once had: regime change. Then came Argentina, 2001. After years of following IMF policies to the letter, the country collapsed. Banks froze accounts, unemployment soared, and the streets erupted in chaos. The people shouted one phrase that echoed around the world: "Que se vayan todos!" They all must go. The IMF quietly withdrew. Soon after, Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Brazil began rejecting IMF control. Leaders like Hugo Chavez and Lula da Silva paid off debts early and refused new agreements. It was a new era, an attempt to break free from the empire of debt. Yet the game didn't end. Today, the IMF remains powerful, influencing currencies, drafting reform packages, and, according to many, still shaping governments from the shadows. No tanks, no bombs, just balance sheets and policy recommendations. Because the new coups don't happen in the streets, they happen in spreadsheets. And the question remains: how many governments truly fell because of their people? And how many because of interest rates and debt? Latin America learned a harsh truth. Freedom is not just political, it's financial. As long as debt remains a weapon, independence is just an illusion. The IMF never appears in headlines as an aggressor. But in the silent wars that shaped nations, it was always there, advising, approving, and controlling. In the end, the most dangerous power isn't the one you see, it is the one you owe.